everyone, my name is Garrett and I am the founder of Ambition in Motion, and I'm so excited, I'm so grateful to have you here for our first workshop. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that you've decided to invest in yourself to build a mentoring relationship with someone from your organization so then you can help amplify your own career prospects and opportunities to really help take your career to the next level. I'm really excited for you and what you're going to accomplish over these next 4 months. So during this video, I just wanted to give you an overview of what to expect for the program and how to prep for this upcoming workshop. Now, this workshop's title is called Transitioning into a Managerial Role. So maybe you're in your career and maybe you're about to start entering into a managerial role, or maybe you've been a manager for a while, or maybe you're not a manager quite yet, but you will be. This workshop will be extremely insightful for you. You are going to learn a ton about management and how to properly manage somebody and how to not properly manage somebody. If you have any questions throughout this workshop, please post them in the comments section. So our workshops are the first ones on transitioning into a managerial role. The second one is determining when is the right time to pursue additional education, or if it's the right time to pursue additional education. The third workshop is determining when is the right time to switch jobs. And the final workshop is on how to handle conflict in the workplace. So they're really relevant topics, and I think that you're going to really enjoy these workshops and the guest speakers that we've brought in for you to learn from during these workshops. We will send you a post-program assessment to get your feedback. So this workshop is going to be roughly an hour long, and we're going to cover a lot of topics on how to transition into a managerial role. And so for you, my focus is on how can you go about making the most out of this. Really, the best way to go about making the most out of these workshops is to interact with us. When I ask a question to you, the audience viewing this, answer it, because here's the thing. I would rather you post your questions in the comment section, because if you got this question, I guarantee you somebody else in the audience does as well. So if we were to answer questions on an individual private basis, we're not really answering everybody's questions. But if you post your questions in the comment section, we can share this with everybody so then they can get their answers just like you got your answer. This program doesn't guarantee you a promotion or a new job. Really, the key is this program's for professionals who want to take their career to the next level. Like, we don't hand things out on a silver platter. Now, by the way, do these types of opportunities happen for the professionals that use this program? Absolutely. But you got to be open to it. You got to be willing to put your time in to go ahead and make the most out of this experience. If you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm going to come in negatively or skeptically, you're going to get negative and skeptical results. I mean, it's the law of attraction. If you come in with a negative mindset, you're going to manifest a negative mindset. If you come in with a positive mindset, you're going to manifest a positive mindset. It's all about how you view this system, this workshop, this opportunity. So come in with the right idea, with the right mindset, and you can make the most out of this experience. I promise that. So I just want to set the expectation properly. This is a program that does not hand out things on a silver platter. If you work for them, you can absolutely take your career to the next level, but it's about applying them. It's about actively meeting with your mentor. It's about actively networking and actively doing what you can to make the most out of this experience. Ask questions, interact, take advantage of everything we've got for you, and you will get the opportunities you desire. I mean, that's what this program's here for. If you think like, oh, I'm going to do the bare bones minimum, I'm just going to kind of have just 3 phone calls and, we'll keep them at the minimum length of time, and I'm just going to attend the workshop, not take any notes, not really make any comments, not really talk to anybody about what I'm learning, you're going to get those types of outcomes. That's pretty much it. So I really want to encourage you to make the most out of this program. Take advantage of it. Ask questions, participate, and interact. Treat this program as fuel. Treat this program as fuel to help you get to where you want to be. If you're already burning and going strong, going hard, this program can help you get into the next level and accelerate. If you're barely burning a fire, barely burning an ember, and you really want to rekindle that and get yourself up, take advantage of it. Jump in. But if you think to yourself, you know what, I'm barely burning this ember, I'm not really trying to burn this ember, really there's nothing there, the fuel can only do so much for you. So the point I'm making is come in with an open mind and a willingness to work hard, and you can achieve what you want. I mean, have professionals use this program to gain a managerial role or negotiate a raise or build deep bonds with their colleagues or expand their networks. Absolutely. But did those outcomes come handed on a silver platter? No, they didn't. It's about how you can apply what you're learning in this workshop to make the most out of this experience. So I want to share with you a little bit about my background, because I think that helps give some context as to who I am, what we're teaching, what we've learned, and why this information is relevant. So for me, I personally needed mentors in my life. And this might sound crazy, but from age 15 to age 19, I was a drug dealer. At the end of my freshman year at Indiana University, I got arrested in an undercover operation by the Indiana University Police Department, and I got 5 felony distribution charges. I was expelled from school, and I had no idea really what I was going to do with my life. It hit my life like a brick wall. I mean, up to that point in time in life, I thought success was you go to school, you get good grades, you get a job, and then you just kind of find yourself, like as if it's puberty. It just comes and hits you. And nobody that I had ever known that I ever thought was successful ever was a drug dealer. So I either had to accept being a failure or redefine my definition of success. So I chose the latter. And it was a great decision for me. Kind of like back to the whole law of attraction thing. I opened my mind to what positively could happen from this situation as opposed to negatively. So I enrolled in a program in St. George, Utah after I got in trouble. And they exposed me to the power of mentorship, both on a personal level and a professional level. On a personal level, they were huge. I mean, they helped me come to grips with how I'd affected my family, my friends, my university, my country. I really didn't think that what I had done really would impact anybody or that anybody would care. And that was so wrong. And I really don't ever want to discount the power of personal mentors, because personal mentors can really help you make some serious just strides and have some serious growth in your life, because ultimately those personal mentors can help see you for you. And don't get me wrong, the professional mentors are amazing as well. And by the way, we can mix those two. They can both be personal and professional mentors. But I really want to stress the importance of being vulnerable in a mentoring relationship, just like I've been vulnerable with you right now sharing my story, because I know that when you're vulnerable, you're much more likely to be attractive in that relationship. You're much more likely to build trust. I mean, shoot, you can't even build trust without vulnerability. You have to have vulnerability. So when it comes to building a mentor relationship, I hope me sharing my story with you has helped inspire you to be vulnerable with your mentor and in your mentoring relationship. Just to kind of finish out my story in terms of how I actually got here from being a drug dealer who moved to St. George, Utah. About a month after living in Utah, I flew back to Chicago for the weekend to let my family know my life's getting on track. On that flight, I'm sitting next to a guy. I took a keen interest in who he is. I asked him questions. I took down notes, shared with him a little bit about me, but really I was focused on who he was and asking him questions and really learning about what he had to say, because people love to talk about themselves. I was learning that through a book I was reading called Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And by the time we landed, he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm the director of ground equipment for SkyWest Airlines." And he offered me an internship doing financial analysis on the spot. Didn't care about my background. He decided to take me under his wing and give me an opportunity, and that was so crucial. That was amazing. He didn't care that I might be going to prison sometime in the future. He didn't care really what my future looked like. He cared about me, and he wanted to give me a chance, and that was so crucial. It helped me really take some serious strides in my life and my career. About a year after living in Utah, I actually got very lucky. While I was in Utah, I started a nonprofit to help young men and women who had made poor choices with drugs and alcohol and help them get mentors too, just like I had gotten mentored by that guy at SkyWest Airlines. And the court system saw that. They ended up dropping my felonies to a misdemeanor conviction. Indiana University had decided to re-enroll me, and I started Ambition in Motion with the idea of how can I help people get connected with their careers. I mean, ultimately for me, my vision is a world where the vast majority of people, not a couple people, but the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they're there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. I'm here to try to help you achieve that. That's all I do, is to help serve you to get you to where you want to be in your career. Because the more satisfied you are with your career, the better of a society we live in, and the more happy society is, the better everybody's lives are. I don't know. That's just my way of trying to make an impact on the world. And, you know, if you're going through this right now as a professional and you're thinking to yourself, like, what is my impact on the world? You know, it could be anything. But I think if you're consciously aware of that and think to yourself, I want to make an impact on the world, that's a great starting point. So the point is, be vulnerable and think about your impact, especially as it pertains to your story. Now, I want to talk about 3 keys to success for this program. The 3 keys to success for this program are honing your strategy, your story, and your state. Now, I said those in reverse order of importance. Your state is number 1. Physically, what is your state? Like your physiological state. Are you like amped up? Are you ready? Are you good to go? Are you in such a good mood that you're going to take on the world? Or are you stressed out, hunched over your computer, got bad posture, not feeling great? I mean, your first impression is everything. And when you're going into your mentor meeting, or a meeting with anybody for that matter, and you're coming in with some bad body language, I can promise you, you are not going to have a good first impression, and that will kill that relationship. it is very difficult to overcome a bad first impression. So fortunately, there are some things that you can do to help you get yourself into a positive state. And they take like 30 seconds because your emotions drive your emotions. Now, you might have had the worst day in the world. And you might be thinking to yourself like, oh man, I got to meet my mentor right now. I don't know how I can do this. Here's something you can do to get yourself into a positive state. There's a lot of things you can do. You can do a power pose. You can fake smile for 30 seconds. You could fake laugh for 30 seconds. But what I like to do is I like to shake it out, and I like to dance it out, and I like to scream at the top of my lungs. So what I want you to do right now while you're watching this video, and I know it might sound crazy, you might be in your house, you might be in your office, you might be at work, I don't really care. Stand up, shake it out, shimmy it loose. Stand out. I want you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just go, yeah, just let it loose, let it out, let it go. And the reason why I'm telling you to do this is because you are releasing endorphins to your brain, getting blood flowing to your brain. What this does is it gets you into a positive mood. It takes you from wherever you're at and puts you at a 10. It gets you ready to go. And your physical body, your physiology, your body is saying, thank you. I'm ready for this. I'm ready to take on the world. Your state is crucial. So when it comes to a mentor meeting, get your state right. You're going to give a positive first impression if you get your state right. If you're screaming at work, good for you. Amazing. I'm proud of you. That's awesome. You know, people might think of you and look at you like a weirdo, but that's okay because this is not a coolness contest. This is about you making strides in your career and getting a positive first impression with your mentor and with anybody that you want to meet. Now, the second key is your story. Now, what's a story that you tell yourself? Do you tell yourself a story for why you won't be successful or for why you will be successful? I mean, your story could be, oh, well, you know, I'm an introvert, so I couldn't possibly be good at networking or putting myself out there or trying to get a raise or try to be a manager because, you know, I'm just an introvert. Or maybe you think to yourself, like, I'm an extrovert. I'm crazy around people. I can't even handle it. I'm a word vomiter. I just can't even contain myself around other people. I couldn't possibly be good at networking or in a managerial position. If you tell yourself a story for why you will not be successful, you will not be successful. But if you tell yourself a story for why you can be successful, you can manifest that outcome. If you tell yourself a story, if you literally play in your mind how a situation could go the most positive way you could possibly go, you will get yourself to where you want to be. So I want to ask you right now, and I would love if you could post in the comment section, what is a story that you tell yourself for why you will be successful? Where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? How are you going to do that? Lay out your story of where you're going. It could be the next 3 months. It could be the next year. I don't really care. But put it out there for how you're going to be successful. Share it with the world. Share it with your community here because what that does is it empowers other people to be vulnerable and share their story as well. I'd love if you could share your story of where you want to go in the comment section. Now, the last key is your strategy. So what is the strategy that you're going to do to help you get to where you want to be? Now, this workshop is all about how to transition into a managerial role. So the strategy is going to be all about how can you go about becoming a better manager. Now, take the skills that we're teaching in this workshop with our guest speaker. Take these skills and apply them. One of the things that I love to do when it comes to strategy is to set up a routine. So what is something that you can do on a regular basis to help you reinforce this skill that you're learning in this workshop? Because if you're just here in this workshop and you're just watching this video and maybe you're taking notes, like that might stick. But if you actually teach it to somebody else, that is definitely going to stick. Exponentially, you are much more likely to remember the information that you're taught if you teach it to somebody else. So what I want you to do when it comes to strategies, I want you to take what you're learning during this workshop and I want you to apply it and teach it to somebody else. This could be a friend, it could be a stranger. I don't really care. But teach something that you learned that you thought was impactful and powerful to you. I love if you could do that because if you can, you're going to reinforce this information and this program, this workshop, this whole experience is going to be so much more powerful to you because you are reinforcing what you are learning. So the way that you can practice, find an accountability partner, teach them the skills that you are learning, something that you learned. And it could be anything. Like whatever nugget of wisdom that you heard from me or from our guest, teach it to somebody else. That will help you reinforce it. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for you to embark on your mentor relationship. And in this mentor program, I'm really excited to get started with our guest speaker.
Everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I'm so excited to dive into our topic. Our topic is how to effectively transition into management. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I'm in my career. I'm excited. The work is going well. but I'm ready for that next level. I want to jump into this leadership role. I want to take on more responsibilities. Maybe I want some of the compensation that comes with more responsibilities. Maybe I love leading people and I like the people side of leadership. Either way, we're going to talk about how to effectively transition into management. We've got a great guest with us today. We've got Cathy Guthrie. Cathy, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, Cathy, before we dive into our topic of how to effectively transition into leadership, I'd love to first start off with your story. What was your story like? What was your transition into leadership like? How did you go from college to early career to your first leadership position? How did that transition and transpire?
Well, that is a great question because mine was not linear. It's not the way a lot of people expect an executive to have been. I went to college for 1 year and was shocked, frankly, at how unprepared I was. And so I quit and I left. And I got married around the same time. Been married to the same guy for 40 years, so that part worked out. And I just started working. I entered the workforce. I was very, very fortunate that it was the 80s and computers were coming out and they needed people who were willing to put themselves out there to learn something new. And so I threw myself into the fray. And, it was easier then in some ways because nobody knew anything about
Okay,
what we were doing.
I want to ask that. Is there
Okay.
comparisons between computers and AI, like from then to today? Or would you say that people are more proactively seeking out AI now than computers were back in the 80s?
When I started, it was still so new. It was really only at very large companies and banks. And I think that is a good parallel to AI because now AI started, same thing. It was only with very large companies and people who could afford to do the research to understand it. And it's a skill that you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but it's a good parallel. People are going to learn how to use that. They're going to get comfortable with it. And it's a new frontier. So yeah, I think that's a great parallel. And some of us old dogs were even trying to learn it. So it's something for everybody. But as I said, I went to work. I was very fortunate. Had a friend that worked in a bank, got me in as an assistant. So I started that path. I was an executive assistant. I was an office manager. I did that for 15 years, and worked for
Well,
some.
hold on a second. Executive
Uh-huh,
assistant to office manager. That
uh-huh.
sounds like a transition to leadership.
It
How did
is.
that transition?
I was very fortunate that I ended up being executive assistant for some CEOs who had never had an office manager. I advocated for the position and said, hey, look, it looks like we have these disparate people out here as admins who don't really have a leader. We have a lot of turnover. I saw the problem. I provided a solution and said I'd like to do it. And they said, sure, okay. it's
So,
it's it's
okay, another question on this, because I think that's a
uh,
really cool and fascinating situation. You were in this time pretty young in your career. I would imagine. I mean, did your family work in kind of like the banking space? Like contextually, did you know that
no.
office manager was even a position or even an option? Like, how did you know to even suggest that? Because I would imagine, man, if I'm like, this is my first career, I'm an executive assistant, there's a bunch of other executive assistants, they're dropping like flies, like, what the
Mhm.
heck is going on here? Like, maybe this is normal. I don't know. Like, how would you know to even
Yeah.
propose an office manager position at that time period?
Good question. By the time I became an office manager, I'd been an EA for about 10 years.
Okay.
And so I had seen some office manager positions in some of the companies I had been in. I'll be honest, one of the things that motivated me was I saw particularly women in positions of power who were really horrible. They were just awful to work with. They were kind of on a power trip and they used that over other people, and that really disturbed me. I believed, still believe, that whoever you are, if you have a position of leadership, then you have a debt, if you will, to those other people to advocate for them and give them a platform where they can kind of do their best work. And so I had been mulling on this, and Again, it was my boss was complaining about turnover. I was having to be tasked with doing the hiring of these admins. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I'm doing all the purchasing. I'm having to do all the recruiting for this position. I believe if that the reason these people are leaving, because I did listen, was they're leaving because they didn't feel like they had a voice and didn't feel like anybody noticed what they did. So I thought, well, what if I step in the gap? And so I did. I brought performance management. I had interviews with all the employees that were on the team. I took that back to the manager. I was able to get some things changed for them. And as a result, in the first year, I didn't have any turnover. Well, he was turning over the entire staff every year.
Whoa. So you staying for 10 years was a major anomaly. And you were also probably the longest tenured executive assistant at the company.
No, let me correct that. I said I had been in the job for 10 years,
Okay.
not at the same location.
But at the same company?
Nope.
Oh, interesting. So you'd been an executive assistant for a variety of different banks.
Yes.
Why did you leave those banks?
Not
Okay.
even banks. I did
Okay.
banking one time because someone got me into it.
Okay.
And then we moved and we went to a different town and I did a mortgage lending situation. And then I went to title company and then I ended up in oil and gas. And the oil and gas kind of stuck for a while. And it was the 80s, early 90s. Companies were turning over a lot. You had a lot of reductions in force or layoffs. And so I just kept being like the cat I'm called and just kept landing on my feet. And so each time I went to a new place, I knew more than I knew before. I knew more to ask for. I knew more responsibility that I had seen in other people in other positions. And I started to absorb some of that. And frankly, I had someone who was a really horrible person to work for, but she gave me some really, really good advice. I think I was probably about 25, 26 at the time. And she said, Cathy, you're really good at what you do. You're pretty intuitive, but that's not good enough. You need to not just do what I ask you to do, but you need to think about what's the next thing that needs to be done. Can you do it? You need to think of the next thing that needs to be done. Can you do that? And do it all until you get to a point where you have to ask for help or direction. And that's how you're going to learn. And so while it was not a great situation, and that's something too, you're going to go into some bad jobs that weren't as they were presented. And you have to look for what can I learn here? What can make me better, stronger, more valuable? And
You
so
know,
I was able to leverage that.
that's so funny you say that because I do feel like that's such a thing where even in the worst bosses, even the worst situations, there's always a nugget of golden wisdom that comes with that. So I'd love to ask the students a question. Post in the comments section. What is something that you learned from a boss, even if it was a bad boss? Ideally, it was a good boss, but what was something that you learned from a boss that really stuck with you throughout your career? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. So, okay, so you're now the office manager. You mentioned that you were able to get higher retention than the company had ever seen. What do you think you did differently to keep those people around and just effectively make that transition into leadership?
Well, I didn't make any promises I couldn't keep, which was problematic at the time.
Why was
Um,
that problematic?
because the CEO was a really good person. He meant well, but he was also prone to just half listen. So he would nod his head. He knew that was a good thing. So he'd nod his head. He would say, yeah, I'm going to take care of that. And then nothing happens.
Oh, did he have a case of CEO happy talk?
Yeah, he did.
Oh,
He
that's a
did.
thing. And by the way, I think students, this is a thing that happens. It's not a thing that died in the 80s. It still goes on today all the time in an
Yes.
effort to be optimistic and like attentive and focused. CEOs can tend to, and I think a lot of leaders can tend to overstretch themselves or overpromise things that truly they can't deliver on and just can't be self-aware enough to say like, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. And I'm sorry, but like, we're just going to have to make some decisions. And this might not be one of the things we go with.
Right, to be direct. I do think being more direct today, we've got leaders out there like Brene Brown who are clear as kind. And I think that that is more prevalent today than it was then. But that was a huge difference. And so for me to say, okay, you think you're underpaid, let me look into that. Well, yeah, so and so always promises that. No, no, I'm committing to you. I will get back to you by X date. And then I got back to them by X date, even if the answer was no. So they were always afraid. And back then, well, maybe some today too, a lot of admins were female, and these guys were afraid they would cry or get upset. And so they didn't, to your point, they didn't want to be direct. And I think that differentiated me. I brought in performance management. Okay. You don't think that people see what you really do? Let's do a performance review twice a year. You do a self evaluation, and then you can give it to the manager that you support. Let's open the lines of communication. Let's start getting you feedback. And as we did that again, they felt like what they did mattered, right? They were contributing to the success of this small company. And then they felt like they were more visible. And there were some things that the manager, the CEO had promised that I was able to take back to him and say, look, 5 people say you promised them this. What can we do? I'm not saying you can do all of that, but what can we do to recognize their contribution? And it did make a difference. And so, unfortunately, when I left the company to finally become an HR and facilities manager at a startup, the entire staff left within about 6 months of me
Yikes.
leaving. So it matters, right? It is not just who's there, it's what are you doing? Are you actively listening? Are you advocating? And are you being honest and direct about it? And I think that was hugely different.
So, Cathy, I think another thing that I think students are interested in, I think as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young professional, you think to yourself, okay, cool, I want to get up to the C-suite. Well, you're uniquely in the position of being a chief people officer. You've got the C in front of your name. What was the transition like from maybe mid-level manager to the C-suite? How did you make that transition? What was that process like?
Well, I'm going to go back just for a second and say moving from office management into an HR manager was just such a huge transition for me because I had been in a role like many people that you're speaking to have been in, where they were kind of order takers, right? My boss told me what to do. I was going to go do it. Well, now I'm suddenly in a position that I'm completely uncomfortable with. It's like, wait, I'm used to being the Oz, the voice behind the curtain. Now I have to be in front of the curtain. And so that was kind of the first really big transition where I was so insecure and I was so frightened that even though I was an expert on something, I didn't feel like I could do a training on it as an example.
Wait, what do you mean by the voice in front of the curtain versus the voice behind the curtain? Like, I'd imagine as an office manager, you're still in front of people, but maybe not as much as the HR leadership role.
Well, in my small company, I was in duality. I was still the CEO's assistant.
Okay.
And so I was coordinating events, big events. I was having big projects I had to create. I was doing things with financial advisors and sending financial packets out that were then manual, a little different world. And and so as things needed to be done, I would go to the CEO and the CEO was the front man, right? So a lot of people didn't know exactly what I did. And that's what I mean by I was behind the curtain. I was moving the levers. I was getting the work done,
Yeah.
but I didn't have to stand in front of people. I didn't have to really own it, if I'm frank.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I made a mistake, I didn't get blamed for it publicly. It was really him. But once I got to the HR manager role, then it was like, no, you own recruiting. You own the benefits. You own performance management and employee development and all these things. And frankly, I had a extreme phobia of talking in front of people. As much as I talk, I still had that phobia. And it was something that I had, I literally had to go through this exercise with my CEO at the time before I could do a training I mean, I was freaking out. I had writer's block. I couldn't do anything. She took me in a room, made me close my eyes, startup in the early 2000s. And she started asking me a series of questions. My eyes are closed. She's writing on the board. I didn't know that. She's writing on the whiteboard everything that I was saying. When I opened my eyes, she said, look, here's your outline. You know these things. I need you to get from standing behind the column to being willing to be the expert standing in front. Sometimes you're going to win, and sometimes you're going to fall down and get mud on your face. This is your time to take that opportunity. And so, that was pivotal for me. It was pivotal for me, Garrett, because it was like, oh, this game is different.
So with that said, that's a really cool story. And what I love about it is it acknowledges that there are mistakes that can be made as a leader, and there are things that you can learn from. What are common mistakes that new leaders fall into? Like, especially if I'm a recent graduate, I'm in my career, maybe I'm already into a manager position, or I'm looking to get into a manager position.
Mhm.
What are common pitfalls that I can easily avoid as a new leader?
Well, I can tell you that mine was very similar to so many people I coach today, and that is what I had learned from that prior CEO. I learned about being direct. And so, I was told a lot when I was going from mid-level manager to try to get to a VP level. Cathy, you're too nice. You're not going to get promoted. I was told, by the way, that I would never be an executive. So if anybody ever tells your listeners that, say thank you very much for your consideration and walk away, because they don't know. And so, I was told you're too nice. You're too nice. What they really meant was you're not direct enough. You don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And quite frankly, I wanted to be liked. Most of us want to be liked. And so what I've learned over time, and I hope that your listeners can learn from, is Brene Brown is right. Right? Kind is being clear, helping people understand, because what I do understand today, most people want to do a really good job. Unless they're pathological, they want to do a good job. And so to tell them, hey, these things that you did, an example, right? You're listening to a call that someone's done, you're training them. Don't give them a feedback sandwich. Some circles, it's known as another kind of sandwich that's unpleasant. And what that means is giving them something good or positive, telling them something that's hard to hear, and then giving them something good
It's
again.
unclear.
Yeah,
It's not clear at all. It's not
they're
direct.
clueless.
Yeah. I'd
They
love to.
walk. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd love to ask the students a question real quick.
Okay.
What can you do to be more direct in your workplace? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn, because even if you're not a manager, I think that clear is kind and
Yes.
being direct is beneficial, whether you're an individual contributor or a manager or an executive. Like, that is a skill that if you can harness will be one of the most powerful things for your own development
Yeah.
as a professional and as a leader. But yeah, no, sorry, go ahead, Cathy.
No, that's okay. It's just I learned from him that being direct got what I was looking for. Number one, as a leader, what do you need? You need someone to meet expectations. But I also understood over time that most people want to know what they're doing well and not doing well. If you give them the feedback sandwich, they walk away and they're like, am I in trouble? Am I getting promoted? What's happening?
Yeah, or worse, waiting till the performance review to give that person the feedback. Waiting
Oh
for a
yeah.
year. It's like, okay, so wait, you're telling me this thing that I did 8 months ago
Yes.
really irritated you, but you waited until 8 months later at the performance review to tell me about it? Like, I've
It's
already made
true.
this a habit. It's really hard to change a habit. Why wouldn't you tell me immediately that you were frustrated at this thing?
Absolutely. And I love what you said about even with peers, even if you're not a manager. I do some training at some of my companies that I've been at where I try to teach how to give feedback peer to peer, because so many things that we do, regardless of level, is you have different people touch things and then they come to you. So a little like doing projects when you're in college, right? And everybody's supposed to do their part. Well, if you've already seen that someone is late 2 or 3 times in getting their projects to you, for heaven's sake, don't wait. Don't wait until they're late again. When you get the new project, sit down with them and say, "Hey, not sure what's going on, not sure what's happened, but I've noticed on these last 3 projects that you've been late to get that to me. And then I have to work all night or all weekend to get the project completed. How can I help you figure out how to manage your time or whatever it is you need so that you can get that to me on time and I can learn to trust that you're going to do so?" Man, most people want to be pulled before they go over the cliff, right? Because then if they don't do it, you can have a conversation around, "Look, dude, I'm gonna have to talk to my boss because this can't keep happening." But everybody wants that firsthand conversation first. Let's talk as partners, assume positive intent, and see how we can get this resolved amongst ourselves. That's where you start showing up like a leader long before you're a manager.
Mm,
So
I like it. I think that's really a really great story and a really great sentiment. So I want to go back to a question I asked earlier. How do you transition? Because I think, as a young professional, by the way, I also love the fact that you shared in your story that someone told you you'd never be in the C-suite or an executive, and like obviously you're now, a chief people officer now, which is so cool. How do you make the transition into a C-suite leader? How do you become an executive? Like, I think that's something that is relatively blurry and it isn't necessarily obvious. And I think there's an element, maybe a little bit of luck, but a lot of like, knowing the right people at the right time, doing the right things. I guess I'd be curious to know what was your transition like? How'd you get there? Because not everyone gets to the C-suite. Most people go their whole careers never hitting the C-suite,
right.
and for them that's fine if they're fine with it. But there's a lot of I think there's a lot more college students that leave college thinking to themselves, "Oh, I eventually want to become a C-suite executive," but they don't realize that only a small percentage of people actually get into those types of roles. How
That's
did you do it? What did you do that was unique or different?
I think for me, I started my HR career, which is how I got to be an executive at a startup. So the lines were really blurry, nothing was defined. And it was really, and I think a lot of companies are still this way in some regard. They want people who are continuous learners, who are willing to take a risk, and who will work really hard to learn everybody's job, learn everything that you can learn as you're going. I've always done that. I've always just been, some people would like to say naturally curious. I'll just say nosy. I always wanted to know what's going on. I wanted to see how I could impact it. But I was willing to take a risk. I went from a small startup to a multi-billion dollar company where I didn't have to take a decrease in title, but I was willing to do that. I was an expert at that point in startups. I had built high performance teams. We were best places to work. So I kind of had a specialty.
Kathy, if I'm an eager employee and I want to get into a leadership position, what can I do to get there? What can I do to communicate my interest? Because I don't know. So I think in some workplaces, if you communicate that you're interested in a leadership position, your boss might be thinking you're trying to take their job. That's
Right.
and some non-growth minded people, scarcity
Right.
minded people, that's what they're thinking about. How do I go about effectively communicating my drive for leadership and taking on roles? Is it talking to someone saying, "Hey, I'd love to be in a leadership position," or is it more like identifying a problem saying, "Hey, I think I could help solve this and it could be solved via some leadership position," kind of like what you did with the executive assistants to being office
Mhm.
manager?
So I think, Garrett, that the most important thing is you have to be a top performer. You got to start there. I have had so many people come into my office say, "I want a promotion," and they were underperforming. No one's going to take you seriously. So be really good at whatever it is that you're currently doing. Then, yes, it's certainly look for those opportunities where you do see a problem and then you think about it, not forever, right? But you take it, you try to brainstorm, how might I solve this problem? Then you talk to someone that is in authority to say, "Hey, I noticed this and I was thinking about it. Not sure if this is feasible for us." Always give them that way to not have to shoot you down, so to speak, but to be able to converse about it, and then really talk to them about, here's this solution that I've come up with. Might this be possible for me to take on um, in just the job I'm in? It's so funny. Managers are always looking for ways to make their life easier. And so that would be rule number 2. Make sure that you're making your manager's life easier.
Oh, thank God you said that. I'm so grateful that you said that, because seriously, that is something that I find fascinating. I'll talk to some professionals who will say things along the lines of like, "Oh my gosh, I've told my manager how many times that I've been wanting to become a leader myself and step into this type of work or do this type of role or do these types of things for the company." And it's like, put yourself in their shoes. Did you make their job easier or harder? Did you ask them to do a little work to try to figure out how to plug you into some position that you get to do something that you asked them to do? Or could you say, hey, I've been noticing that we've had this problem. I'm assuming it takes you a lot of times to rectify the situation. I'd be happy to take this on. Would you like me to do that? Oh my gosh, yeah, please, thank God, take it off my plate. It's so much of an easier transition if
Yes.
you talk from the position of making their lives easier, but also knowing what their incentives are as well. Like if you know, for example, that part of this, like the main part of this person's bonus process at the end
Mhm.
of every year is from achieving some certain type of result from some certain type of activity, they might be a little more reticent to hand that off to you, because if you don't perform well, that directly hits them financially. So they might say, hey, I want to still own this process or this work that needs to be done. But that's okay. Just understand how they're incentivized and always come to the table with new ideas on ways to take things off their plate, because you're right. Managers want things to be easier on them. But also, when it comes to being easier on them, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I've got a micromanaging manager. Like, how could I go about making things easier on them if they don't even trust me to get the work done? The answer is you have to build trust. You have to show them you could competently get this done, because it adds more work to their plate if they think by giving you this task and delegating this thing to you that
Yes.
sometime down the line, they're going to have to fix all the mistakes that you've made because you didn't end up doing it right.
No, that's 100% right. And I think the other thing is, it is about making yourself invaluable, right? That when you that you're learning more about your business. Okay, let's say you work in product. What do you know about your client success team? What do you know about your support team? How do those two interact? Right? Is there something that you can suggest as a, hey, I noticed we don't really hand off to this other team very well. I think I'd like to work with a person from the other team and see if we can come up with something. That's the kind of, proactive thinking. It's like, don't wait to be told. Um, and someone told me this a long time ago, and I didn't understand it at the moment, but it really is true that whether you want to say power or authority, whatever your word is not given, it's taken. And I don't mean that like go put your, stake in the top of the hill and push everybody off, but that idea of you own your career. And there's I don't want to name any in particular in case there's a problem with that, but there's science out there that shows that those who advocate for their own learning and their own development are at a much higher, it's a crazy number, I'll say 80% plus, more likely to move up in their careers. And so, yes, if you can work at places that have career development programs, if they have things after hours, if they have webinars, if you can't watch the webinar during your work time because that's not permitted, good grief, watch it after hours. Learn what you can And your role will just start naturally to expand. That's
Yeah.
how it worked for me.
Cathy, you've shared a lot of great wisdom about just being direct, about being clear, about advocating for yourself, and just being accountable for your work. And also, I love the fact of like what you said of just, you have to be good at what you're doing before like you can advocate for more work. Because I mean, I think if you're a student or a young professional and you go to your boss and you're like, hey, I noticed we have this issue and I'd love to start working on this. Maybe I could take it off your plate. Your boss is not going to give you the go ahead if you're not doing a good job within your own work.
That's
Like if
right.
you're doing like a subpar job within your own work, your boss is like, no, like you're doing a subpar job here. What confidence level do I have that you're going to do anything better than subpar in this other thing? And if you do both of them crappy, then I need to replace two positions because you're not doing either of them that well. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. Are there any other final points that you just love to impart on our audience before we sign off from this workshop?
Yeah, and one just came to me, which is after you've completed a project or it's the end of a quarter or something like that, part of self advocacy can be to ask your manager, how did I do with that? How did you rate me on that? Is there something I could have done better? This shows curiosity, it shows vulnerability, it shows that you're hungry. So that's an easy one that you can do in the job you're in today. The other thing I would say is if you have not yet been introduced to Patrick Lencioni's series of books, they are like Bibles, business Bibles for me, or management Bibles. You can start with the 5 dysfunctions of a team, read The Advantage. Even if you're not a manager, you can look at the ideal team player, the ideal manager. There's lots of nuggets in there. They're told as a story or a parable. So they're not like reading some business books of, oh gosh, I can't get through that. But then really look at yourself and say, how do I do on these things today? What can I learn? And start to live those. And then listen to podcasts, do more of these things where you are learning, because that is how you move up in your career. It's how you even frankly figure out what is it that you want to do in your career. Because I want to be clear, when I started on this journey 40 years ago, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to work hard, I wanted to get a good paycheck, and I wanted to learn and move up. And so maybe you're more ambitious than I was, but it's okay if you don't know yet. Just do your best and put some of these skills into play. And I think you'll be surprised at what opens up in front of you.
I love that. And I love that tip of just being proactively curious because, if you do projects and your manager keeps giving you 10 out of 10s, when it comes to the performance review time, there should be no surprises. It should be a consistent 10 out of 10.
Correct.
Because if it's not, then you could be direct and say, hey, I feel like I've been proactive with you about your feedback on my performance. And every time I ask you, how'd you feel about this project or this thing that I did, and you keep giving me 10 out of 10s, how can in a performance review, when it comes to whether it be bonus time or just general feedback, like how
Mhm.
can we, why is this feedback not consistent with the previous feedback? And you've got a very compelling case there because you've been direct, you've been forward, you've been forward thinking and proactive about it up to this point. And yeah, you've got a case.
I agree with that 100%. And I think that, asking them, being really good at what you're doing, and then asking those questions, it helps them think about what more can you be doing. It also makes them receptive to when you do bring something up. And I think maybe the kind of final tip is, if they ask you to do, they give you the chance, just please deliver, because that happens all the time too. People say, "Oh, Cathy, I want a chance. I want to do this." Okay, I'll give you a chance. Let me give you this to do. It's on the back burner. Let's give you a chance. And then when they don't deliver on time, or I got stuck. Tell me before it's late
Yeah.
that you got stuck. And so just make sure that you are, I love to use this phrase, owning it, that you are owning, you've asked for it, and now you're going to deliver on it, so that then that starts that train. So you start being viewed differently. Because Garrett, as I was thinking about it, that was my hardest thing to get promoted, is because I had to show up differently. See, people see you the way they've always seen you until you give them something to see you differently.
That's a great point, man. That is that's really fascinating. And I also think it works the opposite way too. If like you put someone up on a pedestal and then like you get to know them too well, and then you're like, oh my gosh, you're a human. You're not like super person. Oh my gosh, like that's the where they say don't ever meet your heroes. But your point about building trust is so critical. There's a book called The Speed of Trust.
Mhm.
Cliff Notes version of it is the quickest way to build trust or lose trust. The quickest way to build trust, do what you say and say what you do. And quickest way to lose trust is to not do what you say or say what you do. So I love that. I think that's great. Well, Cathy, thanks for being here. Students, thank you all for being here. This was a great workshop. I look forward to seeing you all in our next workshop. Thanks for your time, everybody.